Well, let me now move to the last of the pre-Socratic schools, and then we will have accomplished my goal for today. And once again, let me make clear my goal for today. We have to get the pre-Socratics out of the way so that we can start Socrates and Plato. I suppose it would be possible in some universes to simply start with Socrates and Plato, but I think there's value in knowing that these people were out there. And not only is there value in knowing that they were out there, but maybe next week I can show you how some of the more important elements of Plato's philosophy really draw upon some of these lessons. For example, Plato does build upon Heraclitus. He does borrow from Parmenides and Pythagoras, and it's helpful to know that. Well, the last school of pre-Socratic philosophy is called pluralism. Everyone we've talked about up to this point has really been a monist. Pythagoreanism may be accepted from that. But the Milesians were monists. Heraclitus was a monist. Parmenides was certainly a monist. He said the only thing that exists is. What is not does not exist. Zeno was a monist. In his book, Gordon Clark says perhaps one thing we can learn, perhaps one lesson we can learn from our study of Parmenides and Zeno is this: corporeal monism is a metaphysical dead-end street. Let's put that up here. Corporeal monism is a failure. Now, what we mean by corporeal monism is this. First of all, the effort to explain all of reality in terms of one thing that is physical in nature. And if we're frustrated when we look at Parmenides and Zeno, perhaps that frustration should carry over to a contempt for corporeal monism. It is a failure. You cannot explain the world in terms of one physical stuff. So, philosophy took a different turn. Philosophers said, if we can't explain the world in terms of one corporeal stuff, let's try to explain it in terms of a plurality of corporeal things. And so what we have now is corporeal pluralism. Three schools of thought are going to try and explain reality in terms of a multiplicity of basic stuffs. And those thinkers are, in order, Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and the atomists. Atomism, and the major representative of atomism will be a man named Democritus. I have the dates for these individuals. If I can put my hands on the dates immediately, I'll put them on the board. Yeah, here we go. Empedocles, 495 to 435 BC, something like that. Anaxagoras, 500 to 428. These are very approximate dates. And Democritus, 460 to 371. Democritus is actually a contemporary of Plato's. Let's quickly go down the list here. Empedocles said, let's suppose there is a finite number of elements out of which the world is made. A finite number of elements. Empedocles said, suppose there are 4 of them. And suppose those 4 happen to be earth, air, fire, and water. Now, Empedocles called these the 4 roots. His position is actually similar in principle to that of 19th century chemistry. It's not too different from the chemistry that I was taught when I was in school. In other words, there are a finite, limited number of elements, and everything else in the world is a composition, a compound of these elements in different combinations. Now, it really doesn't matter whether there are 4 basic elements or whether there are 100 or whether there are 120. the principle is the same. All of the diversity in the world is actually a byproduct of different combinations of this limited number of elements. Now let me show you how that would work in principle. Let's take this table, for example. The chemical composition of that table for Empedocles might be something like this. 3 parts earth, 1 part water, and 2 parts air. E3AWA2. That's the chemical composition of that table. I'm making that up, but that would be a possibility. A lot of the teachers at my university are composed of Empedocles elements in much the same way. Their chemical composition is A6F10. A lot of fire and a lot of air. Right? Their favorite beverage is W2F8, fire water. And but even though the example may have some little problems here, you can begin to see what Empedocles was after. An approach to chemistry, an approach to explaining the world that is basically similar to what we do even today. He simply had the wrong elements and he didn't have enough of them. However, he did go on to say that there is, in addition to these 4 basic elements, there are 2 principles at work in the universe that account for the change. There are 2 principles of change. And what these 2 principles do is mix the 4 elements into different combinations to produce the things that we encounter in the world. And these 2 principles are love and hate. Love brings elements together, hate separates them. Now, obviously, Empedocles was using the words love and hate in a spiritual or symbolic sense, a metaphorical sense. But again, we have a significant development that goes beyond anything that we found in the Milesians. 4 basic elements, a principle that mixes them and separates them, and so on. Anaxagoras came along, and he said that won't work. There is simply too much diversity in the world to explain it in terms of a limited number, a finite number of elements. And so Anaxagoras said, let's say that there is an infinite number of elements. Notice we're exhausting the possibilities here. And Clarke makes a lot of that. You can try to explain reality in terms of a finite number of elements, or you can try to explain reality in terms of an infinite number of, let's add one other thing here, an infinite number of qualitatively different elements. There's a question in Anaxagoras. It goes like this. Anaxagoras asks, and I'm not making this up, Anaxagoras asks, how can hair become non-hair? One of the deep mysteries of life, as far as I'm concerned. I've puzzled over that all my life. How can hair become non-hair? Now, what Anaxagoras is getting at is this. How can 2 such different things, how can one thing that is so different from another change the way it is? How can a brown cow eat green grass and clear water and produce yellow milk? How does all of that? Here's Anaxagoras' answer. Everything contains a part of everything else in the universe, he says. He says, those of you who have hair on this part of your scalp, that hair is really present already in the other parts of your body, you see, and it just comes out there. No, that doesn't help in my case, does it? Let's take a different example. How can green grass produce yellow milk, which then changes into strong teeth? Anaxagoras' answer is, there must have been parts of the teeth present in the milk and present in the grass. He believes that technically the only way in which things change is if the percentage of molecules or the percentage of seeds, because that's his name for the basic stuff of the universe. Water can never change into air. What changes is the predominance of seeds of one thing changes. So that when the cow eats the green grass and eventually you have little babies growing strong teeth, it's because the teeth, the molecules, the seeds of the teeth were present in the green grass all along. And we're clearly in the presence of nonsense, and we want to get out of here very quickly. So let me move to Anaxagoras' next point, which was this. Empedocles had his love and his hate, the principle that mixed everything. Anaxagoras also had a principle of change present in his universe, which he called nous, or mind. And I referred to this earlier today, and I told you how excited Socrates got when he first heard about this. This was the first time anybody had ever suggested to Socrates that there might be a rational mind at work in the universe. And then Socrates tells us about his disappointment when he realizes that poor old Anaxagoras just pulled a word out of the dictionary and apparently had no idea of the significance of what he was suggesting. But it won't be very long before Socrates and Plato try to draw our attention to the fact that there really is intelligence, a superhuman intelligence present in the universe. But now we come to atomism. And with that, we'll be through. Hang on. The atomists represent the last hope of corporeal, of the Greek attempt to explain the universe. What we had in Empedocles was a finite number of qualitatively different elements, 4 of them to be precise. What we have in Anaxagoras is an infinite number of qualitatively different elements. That clearly looks like nonsense, where there are seeds of everything else in the universe present in everything else in the universe. So what the atomists did was opt for the ultimate in naturalistic, mechanistic explanation. They explained all of reality in terms of an infinite number of qualitatively identical elements. Everything that you and I know about in the world is caused by different combinations of an infinite number of little eternal material particles called atoms. The word atom comes from two Greek words which really mean cannot be divided. An atom is the smallest part of reality that cannot be broken down any further, that cannot be divided into anything else. And the atomists believe that the world, the universe, is composed of an infinite number of them. They are all qualitatively alike. They have no color, they have no taste, they have no smell. The only ways they differ are in size and shape. They differ quantitatively, but they cannot differ qualitatively. And so these atoms, here they are. They're moving around in infinite empty space. What Parmenides said is not. In order to be an atomist, you have to believe that what is not is, but we won't go into that. You really do. So these atoms are simply bouncing around like pool balls on an infinitely big pool table, never stopping in their motion. And as they collide and as they enter into new combinations, they bring about everything that you and I know in this world. They bring about noses and ears and hair and eyes. They bring about flowers. They produce colors and smells and sounds. none of which exist inherently in the universe, all of which exist only subjectively within us, as we are subject to the constant bombardment of these atoms. Well, this is a purely mechanistic, a machine-like account of the universe. It is a totally naturalistic account of the universe, and it is an account of the universe that Plato will set himself up as an enemy of. When we gather together next week, I'm going to, sooner or later, after we talk about the sophists and Socrates, I'm going to tell you about the 7 major beliefs in his day that Plato opposed. And many of those beliefs that Plato opposed were actually the beliefs of the atomists: naturalism, mechanism, materialism, and all of the rest. Let's take 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll go. Any at all? Yeah.
So the atomists didn't when the first motion started.
Motion, it's a good question. But it only shows how corrupted you've been. No, seriously. It shows how you probably read J.P. Moreland and you believe that there must have been a first motion, you see? But motion has always existed. If you Christians would get off this horse of believing that there always has to be a first cause, it would be so much easier for you to see the truth in naturalism. Right? Yes.
What determines the order for the atoms?
What determines the order? Here's another Christian, obviously. What do you mean order? There is no order to the universe. Whatever order there is interpreted, is perceived by you. All of this is purely mechanical, purely accidental. Where does intelligence come from? That's a little more troubling. Because you see, if there is no order, no logos, and you and I are just a part of a purely mechanical, impersonal, non-purposeful process, where does reason come from? I'm going to have to think about that. If I think about that long enough, even I might become a Christian. Even I might have to give up my atomism. Yeah, if your mind and the processes of your thought are nothing more than like billiard balls bouncing off of each other, how can you and I ever discover the truth about anything? Well, maybe since there is truth, we're going to have to give up any worldview that is this mechanistic and this naturalistic.